Angela Kennecke, a veteran journalist with 30 years in television news and an investigative reporter. But for the purpose of this podcast, I'm just a mom trying to find my way after the loss of a child in the opioid epidemic. I am grieving out loud, using my platform on TV and on social media to try to stop the stigma of addiction and get more people into treatment so that no other family has to go through the devastation that I and my family have experienced at the loss of our 21-year-old Emily.
Today I'm joined by Steve Grant. Steve is a financial advisor in Greenville, South Carolina, and is just finished writing a book that he is putting out about his two sons and some of the things that have happened in his life. Thank you so much for being here, Steve.
Thanks for having me, Angela.
I just want to start talking about what you have been through, because people always approach me as someone who has lost a child and say, I don't know how you could survive that. And I think it couldn't get much worse. But unfortunately, sadly, tragically, in your case, things did get much worse. You actually lost two sons to overdose.
That's right. I lost my only two children, two sons, Christopher and Kayli, to overdoses in a span of 5 years. One in 2005 and one in 2010.
And so you have been dealing with loss and recovering from these horrible tragedies for about 9 years?
Yes, that's right, from the last one. That's right.
Surviving the loss of one child, let alone two, I'm sure you never in a million years dreamed you'd have to go through something like this twice.
No, and you're right. With my son Christopher, it was more of a classic addiction that you hear about and read about that families have, and it was an 8-year time frame, and it was prolonged, and you saw it from the beginning. You saw the behaviors that a typical son or daughter whose life is being controlled by drugs or alcohol takes, and you see the effect on not only him, obviously, but his family, his siblings. And then Kelly's was very different in the sense that it was an eight-month ordeal that took two different paths to the same result, and that's somewhat tragic. And after my first son died, I kind of said, let's get life on going again. And it was an 8-year ordeal, as I said. And not that I wanted him to die. I certainly didn't want him to die. But I somewhat got to the point where I expected that would be a reality. Because I had done everything I could. He went to 5 rehabs. We left it on the field for Christopher. And nothing we did seemed to stick for any length of time, unfortunately.
Let's talk about that, grieving the loss of a child as their illness progresses in addiction, because you do start losing that person, the real person. And I found that to be the case with Emily for sure. When she was rebelling, when she left my house, when I didn't see her for periods of time, I really was grieving the loss of the little girl that I once had.
Oh, yeah, that's a great point. Just like Emily, Christopher, it was very debilitating. And I remember one time, and I'm not sure when it was, but it was getting close, not close to the end of his life, but close to the time that we were really kind of fed up with the reality of a son being addicted, and we need to do something about this that's a little bit more than watch what his every move is. We needed help. And I remember it being in the driveway one day, and we were very close, Christopher and I. He liked sports. He excelled in it. I liked sports. I sort of excelled in them. So we had a common bond there. And I remember telling him when I came home one day, because he had said something to his mother that wasn't particularly nice. And I told him that I really didn't know who he was anymore. That hit a nerve with him. That really did. I mean, here was maybe his best friend, and his father saying he didn't know him anymore.
And did it make any difference, though?
Maybe it did temporarily.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's the alcohol or the drugs controlling you after a period of time and getting you back to where your mind says I should be. Yeah, because I think it does. I think it does. It's hard sometimes for me to say my boys were both good. They were both very good boys. There's no question about that. But and again, Kelly's situation is completely different than Christopher's. But Christopher, there was just a time where I knew that this was going to happen.
I want to talk about the lack of control, or maybe even the illusion that somehow as parents we have control over our children. and they come into this world, and you talk in your book that's coming out called Don't Forget Me, where you write about this journey of losing 2 children and your marriage and surviving and actually turning it around and doing so much for others, which we're going to get into talk about. But first, let's talk about that aspect of, first of all, being very child-centered, where you think you're going to give your child everything, every opportunity, and you're going to be able to create this great life for them, but yet realizing as they become teenagers and they start making choices and they start falling into the trap, I want to call it, of drug use, which leads to addiction, you begin to realize how little control you really have over another human being, even if it is your child.
That's absolutely true, and it's very frustrating. And back then, not that I was alone, but I'm certainly not hidden under a rock here in Greenville, South Carolina. I've coached a lot of kids. I know a lot of people. I've done a lot of work here in the community, but I didn't know anybody who had this problem, to tell you the truth. And maybe it was because, obviously, today, even so, you don't talk about it very much, at least the vast majority.
And that's what I was wondering, is it's maybe not so much the people didn't have the problem around you or in your community, but it was very shameful, especially 10 years ago. People weren't talking about it.
It's funny, I have some friends that have children have survived, fortunately, and you never really knew that they had an issue. I have one in particular that wants to do something about talking about the stigma of it, and he asked me to help him with that. And I told him that I never worried about what anybody else thought about me as a parent or my wife as a parent, my ex-wife as a parent. I never thought about those things. I only cared about my son. And he came home from his first trip to rehab in Tennessee at Thanksgiving for a break, and he met a person in church one day, and it was a friend of mine, and he said, "Chris, where you been?" He said, "Oh, I've been doing good. I'm in rehab." And Chris said, and the guy said, "What do you mean, your back, your knee, your leg?" He said, No, I'm in there for alcohol and drugs." And, it kind of told me that he knew the deal. That was the sad part about it, is when your son or daughter comes back to you and they're that person that you've always wanted, and he was at one time or she was at one time, and then it turns again. Then people will find you and you will find people very easily.
It is so hard to stay in recovery, and that's one of the things that we try to cover, or I'm trying to cover here in my efforts. Your son, he went into rehab, 5 times over the 7-year period?
Yeah, 5 forms of fashion, and then he also went to a very, very nice, expensive boarding school, which I thought was an alternative at one point. Not that that was going like a rehab, but it was just another attempt to bring him out and separate him from his friends and his environment, and hear the things that he should hear.
So, are you like me? Did you go back and after your first son died, and then especially after your second son died, looking at how did this happen and trying to create some understanding of how this even took place?
A lot of it, I'll be honest with you, a lot of it I don't remember. Everything that I wrote in the book is very clear to me, but there were so many things that happened. A good example, Angela's my closest friend, read the book, and he said, "Steve, I don't know if I was really your closest friend because I never knew any of this happened." And I said, "Well, his name's John." I said, "John, if I would have told you everything that happened, it would have been every day." And that's the way life is when you have a child that was in a CRISPR situation, that drugs and alcohol controlled his every movement.
Well, it's amazing to me that when you're going through this crisis, that you're even able really to function, to get up, to go to work, to prepare meals, to do all the things that we do in life, and to take care of our families, to go to work, just to go on living normally as you're dealing with this crisis after crisis after crisis, which is basically what happened with Emily as well. I was always worried. There was always seemed like something wrong, and I didn't always know what it was or how to respond to it.
I talk to parents a lot, and I always tell them that I'm a parent. I'm not a clinician. I have 2 tragedies in my life, among others, but so obviously the most serious tragedies in my life. As I talk to them, and as I listen to you, I almost have tears in my eyes because I know the struggle as a parent. I know many nights lying there in bed and just kind of wondering, what's he doing and where he is? And in your office during the day, what's he doing, where he is, where is he? And it overwhelms you. And I do see that in most parents. And then I see those parents, though, that I've heard about some kids, and I've told some parents actually about their own child, and they say that's nonsense. It's amazing. Thankfully, most of them are very worried about their kids, and they do.
Yeah, some parents don't want to admit their child has a problem, or they'd rather ignore it or pretend like it's not going on because that's somehow protecting them.
Yeah, and typically when people call me for either advice or some direction, and they explain to me about their son or daughter, and typically, very, very, Emily, I wouldn't say is rare. She's not rare, but it's overwhelmingly, in my world, a boys' issue, and maybe it's because I had boys.
No, it's true. There are more males that overdose and die than females, but it is on the rise among women.
Oh, sure. When I have these conversations with both parents, and very rarely do I have them with both parents. One parent is typically, I wouldn't say persona non grata, but they are either against it, or I'm working, don't bother me, I'm the husband, or I'm the provider, and the other one is the caregiver. And it's very, very interesting. So when you do get two people on the phone, you also very, very rarely see a united front. So I'm always happy when I speak to two parents who are on the same page about this serious issue.
Don't you think that's what also ends up destroying a lot of marriages? Because parents aren't on the same page.
When I first thought that Christopher had a problem, I started reading things, and I
You're
read
just
things.
Like me. Yeah.
Yeah, I read things. I saw where an addicted child or addicted member of your family, you can ruin your marriage, ruin your finances, ruin your family, all kinds of things that happened. And I said to myself, this is not going to happen to me. And I really thought that. I really, really naively thought that. But those things happen. I lost a marriage after 25 years, had problems financially, all the things that go along with it, neglected the other son for the other, basically put him aside for 8 years. And that had to have a tremendous effect on him in hindsight.
But yet you can't blame yourself because you were doing everything that you thought was best, and you made a conscious decision that those things weren't going to happen to you. But yet as you get sucked into this problem, and I really do believe, I have a friend who lost a child and she likens it to a tornado. You're just inside this whirling thing and you're just trying to hold on, and you don't even know what the right thing is to do or the next right thing to do when the last thing didn't work, right?
Right, yeah. It's tremendously debilitating, and I'm really not sure. I do have people that say to me not every day, once a week, but it used to be a lot of people that would say, I don't know how you're still alive, Steve, or I don't know how you ever really got through this, Steve. Yeah. And I think, obviously, I have a great deal of faith, and that I'm convinced that I will one day be with my kids again. At the same time, we can't understand the plan. I don't understand the plan, but it is the plan.
I'm very curious about how you were able to keep your faith. And I think of Job. When I think of you and losing basically your entire family, it's like the story out of the Bible of Job. And you talk about your strong faith and keeping your faith. And I have always thought of myself as a faithful person, as a spiritual person, as somebody whose religious practices mattered to me, was brought up in the Catholic Church. But yet, when I lost a child, it has really been a test of faith. How have you kept your faith?
I too, we have a lot of things in common, fortunately and unfortunately, but that I too was brought up in the Catholic Church, and so are my children. I had no problem with that, really. I just felt like that was the answer, and that was what I needed to lean on. And I do lean on it for other things, obviously for everything in my life. So that was a fairly simple thing, and I don't want to make it very, very. It's very complicated, obviously, but it's at the same time, that faith gets me through this. Your show is called Grieving Out Loud. Is that correct, Angela?
It's called that because you always hear laughing out loud, and I am talking about grief.
Okay, I see.
Yeah, well, but I am talking about grief, so I keep talking about all this stuff, and that's why I say grieving out loud.
Yeah. Well, I tell people that, I grieved, but I think sometimes grieving, there's obviously a component of guilt in grieving. To tell you the truth, I have very, very little guilt, very, very little guilt about my efforts. And I think that also gave me some strength.
Now, do you have very little guilt about your efforts because you do feel like you did everything in your power to try to help the people in your life who became...
Yes. In hindsight, though, looking back, which we don't have the luxury of doing, being successful with it, but it's not a bad exercise when you want to give someone else advice. I remember people saying to me, Steve, you need to send Christopher to some place because he needs to be basically what we say, like an electrician would say, he needs to be rewired. He's 14 years old, 15 years old. Drugs and alcohol have robbed him of his adolescence.
Yeah.
Okay, he's 15, but he might as well be 11 years old, and now he's being controlled and being conditioned by substance or substances, and he needs to go someplace and go. Because I was under the impression, okay, guys, it's the athlete in me, I guess, or the salesman in me, and hey, we're going to go to this 30-day program, and you're going to jump out of that thing, and you're going to be a new man.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
you're cured.
Well,
Fix.
Yeah. What I've learned is that doesn't happen. Or it rarely ever happens. I'm always fascinated by folks that tell me they went to one rehab and it was 28 days, or one rehab and it was 90 days. But I'm convinced for someone that was maybe Emily was in this situation also. I did finally take Christopher to a program that was geared for over a year. Obviously, it lasted one day. Or a day and a half. But he went willingly, but he didn't stay willingly. But again, that's the only thing when I look back, at least for Christopher, when I look back, I say, I should have just, if I did it again, I would put him in some place when he can't leave because he's considered a minor, that he can stay and be there for 18 months. And yeah, it would have been very expensive, but it was very expensive, the whole process anyway.
Anything to save your child's life, too. If you would have known he was going to die, you would have paid anything in the world to
absolutely
put him in.
And about did.
I'm sure. I always hope that my other children observing what happened to Emily would somehow inoculate them from this happening to them. I think that's what's so hard to wrap my brain around, that, your other son observed what was going on, yet decided to use himself. I know the situation was different, but the results were the same. So why do you think that was? Do you have any idea, or have you learned anything on how a second child, and it's not unusual really, which is very sad and very tragic. I'm a member of a Facebook group called #NotInVain. There are about 4,000 moms who've lost children in the opioid crisis on this Facebook group, and many have lost more than one child. And to me, after having lost a child, that's my biggest fear. I don't want to go through this again.
Oh, I've talked to people that have lost 2 kids, but fortunately they have other children. It's just awful, awful.
So why do you think it was that he used drugs? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. And that topic probably is the biggest thing that I get not fascinated with, obviously, but it disturbs me because
a little obsessed.
People do say, and that question comes up very often, I guess, with people that are closer to me that say, why do you think Kelly went down that same road? And it was different, but he did. You'd think he would know the consequences. Now, we're talking about 2 different types of drugs and 2 different times in life. The world has changed, obviously, and heroin is a big deal today. And my second son died of a heroin overdose, and my first son died of a cocaine and methadone overdose. Okay, and to my knowledge, he never used heroin. It's interesting, my first son was put on the impression that he was invincible, but he would never put a needle in his arm. My second son was afraid of his shadow, I think, for most of his life. And for me to think about, I do think about this, for me to think about him putting a needle in his arm, it blew my mind.
Yeah,
to this day, it still surprises me.
Emily was terrified of needles and ran out of the doctor's office as a kid. So for her to put a needle in her arm, I totally understand what you're saying.
Yeah, Kelly wouldn't go. Kelly, when he got prescribed medicine, wouldn't take it.
Emily too, exactly the same.
Meanwhile, Christopher, he became a pharmacist, as I said in the book.
Yeah.
He knew all the drugs, and he knew what was good and what was bad.
So you were saying that you never believed Kelly would put a needle in his arm.
Yep. Now, I will tell you this, though. Kelly died, and I have the person that introduced him to heroin, who doesn't, obviously wants to stay anonymous. He's never used again anything since Kelly died. Now, on the other hand, I know someone who lost their son, and another young man, their best friend, was lying next to him, and woke up and found him dead on the floor, his friend. Now, you would think that would put the fear of God in you and say, I'm dropping this, okay? Well, it probably did for a few days, but I ended up a year or so later, helping that young man get into a rehab program. That is a very, very mystifying thing, is to see that happen again.
The substance, I believe, is more powerful. The hold or the control the substance has. I don't think that they want to continue using, because two of Emily's friends recently overdosed within the last couple of months. Now, both of them were saved by Narcan.
Yeah.
But you think, yes, your friend died. Or I've interviewed a girl who had 10 people that she knows died, and she still can't kick this habit. She's really struggled. It isn't that isn't enough to stop people.
Well, it's
not always.
Interesting. It's interesting you talk about the number of people. So I speak a good bit, and I spoke to a very large audience one morning for a breakfast, and I was talking, and I said, in Greenville, in our county, we have about 600,000 people. And in 2005, and the coroner's a good friend of mine, he went to school with me in college, but the amount of overdoses in our county was in the low 50s. I didn't know anyone who had died of a drug overdose. Really didn't. And then when Kelly died in 2010, I didn't know anybody other than his brother who died of a drug overdose. And in Greenville County then, there were, I think, if I get these numbers right, there was less than 100 overdoses. So it was rising, like it is all around the country. And then in 2016, the last time they gathered some hard information, it was well over 200. In Greenville County, so it's everywhere, and it's very visible. And as that's gone up, I certainly do know people who have lost their children, and I could name 20 of them probably, and I know more because usually I typically try to figure out where I can donate money through Chris and Kelly's Hope.
It's ironic, how we met. I heard you on a podcast talking about the situation, and then I looked up your nonprofit, your charity that you started. And it's called Chris and Kelly's Hope, and I had called mine Emily's Hope. And so much of our stories are parallel. I find that to be true with so many parents who've lost children to overdose. We have very similar stories, and we had really good kids, and we were good parents. It doesn't have to do with that. And I think it's very hard to navigate this in this society. And when I heard that, I just thought, how can this even be that you and I have so many similarities? And you even named I guess you started it first. Unfortunately this all happened to you long before it happened to me, but I named my charity the same as you did. And that word hope, but let's just touch on that for a minute, because Chris and Kelly's Hope, Emily's Hope, why hope?
Well, I've always given back. What I ended up doing ultimately was very, very me. It needed to be unearthed. So it was unearthed at a sales meeting one day after Kelly died. And after Kelly died, I had no inkling of helping anybody. That was not I wasn't saying that I don't want to help anybody. Helping others was not my priority at that point. At this sales meeting, they asked me, this was a couple of weeks after Kelly died, right after it was in 2011 in January, and these two guys from St. Louis came in, and I thought they were going to tell us how to be better business people, but they wanted us to understand what our legacy was going to be when we left this life. And I said, well, that's interesting. So I got up into this room, and when they came to me, they said, after 3 days, we want to see if your legacy's changed. Well, what is it today? And I said, well, I think my legacy is going to be that I want to help adolescent children and young adults who struggle with alcohol, drugs, and depression. And they said, well, why? And then I explained why. And I don't know what, I always say it was certainly a God thing, because I had no idea that morning I was going to go over there and kind of draw a line in the sand that I was going to do this. From that day, of course, I did draw the line in the sand, and I said, okay, I'm going to start Chris and Kelly's Hope. And that was sort of it.
And where does hope, how do you still have hope after losing two children, going through a divorce, losing your marriage? How do you still have hope?
Well, I know that life is precious and life goes on. I'm just not the kind of person that wants to have it go on being depressed and down. What's also going on in our country, obviously, which is horrible, is this suicide rates going up tremendously. And I never got to that place, and I kind of always say, well, how can someone get to that place? Well, a lot of people could say, I don't know how you didn't get to that place, Steve. I never did, and I guess it's just my nature is to be optimistic. Also, I've always cared about other people, probably my detriment. I've cared about other people. So it was really a natural thing for me to do.
I don't want to give too much away, but toward the end of your book, you talk about honor in grief and you talk about
Yeah.
hope and the things that you now know, that you know for sure. Let's talk a little bit about what do you mean by honor and grief?
The honor part is honoring Christopher and Kelly and honoring their lives, making their story obviously in a difficult way, letting people know that have similar stories that there is hope. Fortunately, and I think you'd agree with this, Angela, that this is not a normal occurrence. Most people, because of Narcan and because of other things, they don't lose their lives. And that's very fortunate. Still, it's going to happen, and it's still going to increase. More people obviously live than die. But for those people that lose children or struggle with this mightily, there's obviously going to be, in my case, I want to use my children to let them know that this could occur, and here's why this might occur. And if it does occur, then not everyone's going to do what I did, certainly. But I do want people to know that there is life after it.
What is it that keeps you going?
I think there's obviously some voids in the time frame that will be in this book and discuss it, but I do have bad times, and I still have bad times. They're rare. There was a period of time, take from 2005 when Christopher died to 2010, right before when Kelly died, that I had a down period, a real down period in my life. And so it did take a toll on me. I was never, my life was never in danger, but some of the things I was doing that could have caused some issues. And it was directly because of the loss of my first son.
We all are trying to figure out how to cope. What is the best way to cope? I think my coping mechanism is trying to help others, and I know that is yours. And I know when we first met and we first talked, you said one of the things that really helps you is the fact that you now hear from people who through your charity have been helped. And I haven't really gotten to that point yet because we're so new and we're just starting to raise funds for so many different things to try to get people into treatment, to try to get more people help and increase education. But I know you're a little bit further down the road than me. Tell me about the effect of Chris and Kelly's hope.
Yeah, it's been very rewarding now that we've done it for about 7 years, and we do it very, very part-time, but we've been very successful. I think part of it is the rarity of this you're only losing your only two children. It's really wonderful. We've given to nearly 100 organizations, most of them in the Southeast, but I think we've probably given out in 40 of the 50 states, maybe some organizations, and they're always not-for-profits. That's basically our mantra. I get letters, not all the time. I wish I got more but the ones that I do get are just very, very, very heartfelt. It's either somebody that I've helped get into a not-for-profit rehab, they are thanking me for that, or they're sending me a note and saying, one of Christopher Kelly's friends would send me a note and said, what you're doing and the story that you're saying and telling has helped me tremendously, and I no longer use drugs or alcohol. When we do talk about, well, why did so-and-so's brother do this after their sibling died? Then you hear these stories that, hey, they were affected by this, and that really, a lot of times people think that makes me sad. It doesn't make me sad. Actually, it re-energizes me and confirms that I'm doing the right thing.
Right. I think those things, they come right when you need them, too. Sometimes I feel like, why am I doing this? What is this all for? And then someone will reach out in one form or the other with something encouraging, like just you writing about your story has helped me, or I listened to your podcast and that helped me, or my loved one is going into treatment because of what I heard. And I just think those little things, when they happen, reaffirm that you're on the right track.
Oh, it's huge. It's absolutely huge.
So where are you going from here? You have this book coming out. I read the book. Some of it was a little bit hard for me to read because it hits so close to home. When does the book come out?
Well, that's a good question. I think I have a vague answer to it, but it'll come out. We have a publisher that's out of New York and Newport News, and we have a publicist in Austin, Texas, Dennis Welch. we're working towards the e-version of the book out in the early fall, and the hardcover hopefully out after the end of January. And that's where they are. We have a website now called www.don'tforgetme.com that's been created specifically for the book and information about the book. So we have reviews and people who have given testimonials and things like that. But it's in the early stages, but it's certainly up and running.
Did you ever think you'd write a book?
No, never. But then I started people saying, you need to write a book, you need to write a book. And I think the stories, I think you've read it obviously, and you can relate to those things occurring. And the book is really there to say, here's why this happened. So I try to tell the story and say, this is not unique in this world. But, everyone's situation is unique to them, and I don't ever want to make that a small issue. This is our story, and your husband's story is Emily, and mine is Christopher and Kelly's, and it is our story, but there are tremendous similarities, and the book is trying to let people know that there are tremendous similarities between these kids and how they go about and how this occurs and what happens to families.
Right, to let people know that they aren't alone. And I think also what has really hit me a lot is I have done and met and seen and been in situations, so many things have happened in my life since Emily died that I never could have imagined. And I think that might be the case with you too, with starting your own charity, with writing this book. And you meet people, I mean, you and I never would have met each other. It's almost
I've met the most interesting people, you included. That you're right. And I've helped some organizations either help build a rehab facility and I've gone around the Southeast asking people for money for certain causes other than my own, and you meet some very fascinating people. You meet from all walks of life, and obviously this is a disease and an illness that crosses every economic boundary, every race. It's truly an epidemic.
Well, maybe that's where the hope lies for us as parents, for us to go on and for us to continue this work. That's where the hope is, because the people that show up and the situations that show up and the things that you find yourself doing, maybe that's where the hope for tomorrow lies.
Yeah, and I don't know if 15 years ago or 19 years ago when Chris was going through all these problems, if the help out there was just as much as it is today. But I think there's a tremendous amount of help out there today. And I always try to find where I can help position people. I don't pretend to know everything about it, but I do have some very, very key people that I direct other people to that I feel very confident they're going to get the help that they need. But it's interesting, Angela. I do get calls, and you probably do too, that sort of go like this. Hey, Steve, I got a friend that's going to call you. Do you mind me if you give me his number? And I said, what happens is I'd rather have his number and call him because he probably is not going to call me. Because what happens, you're someone sitting there and you're talking about your child and everything like that, and your friend says, hey, I got a friend who lost 2 kids. Unfortunately, I think he could be some help to you. Sadly, I do get an overwhelming number of calls where friends will say that so-and-so is going to call me, but they never do.
Right, and maybe because I'm in the public eye, people do reach out to me almost every day. The thing that I struggle with is they want my advice and my help, and I always feel if I had the exact right formula or the exact right advice, my child would still be alive.
Yeah, but you also, Angela, realize that when you hear the story, and I'm sure you do listen very closely to the story, you do hear that, like we're talking about, those strange and eerie similarities between Christopher and Emily. And you hear that and you kind of go, and sometimes I'm with families that really don't know about me and what I've been through, and they'll start talking about their son and some of their concerns, or their daughter and some of their concerns, and I know some of the habits that go on, and you do too. And then I'm not going to sit there and say, hey, you need to be worried about that. I'm not. But I do get in the car sometimes with my wife and say, hey, Kathy, I'm real concerned about that young man.
Let's talk about, just for a second, you did suffer through a lot of loss in your life. You lost your 2 sons. You went through a divorce, but you are remarried now. You have rebuilt a life. And I think that's the resilience, the amazing resilience that you have.
Yeah, I'm fortunate to have met my second wife, Kathy. I didn't think I was going to be single for 12 years. I certainly, I met someone without children who had never been married and is my age. It was very rare, and she's a beautiful woman. And she's a very Christian person. It's been a very, very good time. Sometimes I feel badly because, when Kathy and I go to these things or go to these events or where I speak, and she'll, somebody will ultimately come up to her and say, "I'm so sorry about your two boys." And I think it's gotten to the point where Kathy just says, "Thank you," without explaining that those are not my two children. But poor Kathy, she lives with this every day, as I do also, and she feels like they're her kids in some ways. And I wish she had the opportunity to have met both of them.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you have that support in your life, and thank you for everything that you're doing to help other people. You inspire me. You're farther down this journey than I am. You've done a lot. Can you just briefly talk about how much money you've given away, because that was really impressive.
Again, I do it very part time. I need to have a job, and I do have a job or an opportunity and a career I've had for 40 years. But obviously, I enjoy working, so that's always been an issue. But I try to do this very part time, and we've raised, I would guess it's close to a 7-figure sum. Maybe probably somewhere south of that. And when the money comes in, we give it away. That's always just been my philosophy. And I keep a pile on the corner of my desk of people who have found out about me, who want money. I do a lot of giving to not-for-profit. They have to be a not-for-profit, for one thing. Do a lot of these campus recovery programs for young adults and young adults who are in college who are addicted. There's 110 colleges around the country that have programs already designed in their school that they promote if you have a substance problem and you need to be really around some folks that are going through the same thing while you're in college. So that's a big aspect of ours. We give to places that study the science of addiction. That's a big topic today. What can we do besides things like AA and the 12-step program? What can we do scientifically or medically? And that's certainly how Vivitrol and Narcan came along. So those kind of programs. And lastly, we do also give to healthy things like Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and like Junior Achievement, where we have these organizations that are healthy organizations that, the time of day, Angela, that I always worried from was from 4 o'clock to 7 o'clock is when, both parents are typically still at work and they get home and get ready for dinner, but your adolescent son or daughter is home for 3 hours. And that's when they have time on their hands, and that's where things typically occur.
Yeah, well, thank you for everything that you're doing. It's amazing you're trying to think of so many different areas and so many different aspects to try to help other people, to prevent other people from going through the same type of situation that you have lived through, you have survived, you have done it amazingly well. I know it hasn't always been easy. I understand what you're saying about periods of deep grief and feeling lost. And there are people out there listening who have gone through loss in many different ways. I mean, you can lose a spouse, you can lose a job, and it's hard to measure a level of loss. What advice do you have for somebody right now who may be stuck in grief?
I would certainly find a support group. I would let them know that there are people who sincerely understand what you're going through. I get a note sometimes, and I'll say, I can't understand what you're going through. And when I send a grief note to you, if I had known you and when Emily had passed away tragically, I would have sent you a note and said, I do understand what you're going through, because I do. There are people out there, so I would encourage anyone who's doing this to certainly gradually put their toe in the water and visit a group or find out. There's all kinds of grief support out there, and they're very, very, some of them are very specialized. So there are group supports like you're talking about, or Facebook pages, clubs on the internet that you can hear the advice of others.
Yeah, well, there are different paths for every person to take, for sure. But thank you so much for giving us all hope. Really appreciate it, Steve.
Thank you, Angela, for your time. I really appreciate you reaching out to me.
I believe we can all learn from each other as we walk through life, and by sharing our suffering, we can lessen the suffering of others. Until next time, wishing you faith, hope, and courage. To read my blogs and join us in our mission, just go to Emily's Hope at paintingapathtореcovery.org. Also, please rate and review this podcast. Thank you.